Welcome back to The Climate Layer. I'm Alex Banat. If you've watched the show Landman, you know the scene I'm talking about. In Season 1, Episode 3, Tommy Norris, an oil industry fixer played by Billy Bob Thornton, is asked by an attorney why the company is using clean energy at the well site. What follows is a confident, well-delivered monologue dismantling wind power point by point, reliability, carbon payback, manufacturing costs, transmission infrastructure. In a few minutes, he hits nearly every major talking point against renewable energy. The scene went viral. It was shared by oil executives, fossil fuel advocacy organizations, and at least one sitting U.S. senator, treated less like a line of dialogue from a TV drama and more like a factual statement. That is exactly why we're doing today's episode of The Climate Layer. A few things before we get into it. First, due to copyright restrictions, we cannot play the actual clip on this podcast. The three of us who are here today watched the scene together before recording, and I'm going to walk through it and the specific claims made, and then we're going to unpack it together. Second, and I want to be clear about this, we are not here to review Landman as a show, tell you whether to watch it, or comment on the show's politics or creative choices more broadly. We're using one scene, about 7 minutes to 4 minutes of dialogue, as a case study, because it is an incredibly efficient example of persuasive misinformation we have come across in television. The goal is not to criticize the show, it is to understand why this particular piece of writing worked so well on so many people, and what that teaches us about how misinformation moves through culture. So today, I brought in two people who think about persuasion and misinformation from completely different angles. Matt Brady is back with us. If you haven't heard our episode on the alpha wolf myth, first off, please take a listen. Matt did a wonderful job unpacking its impacts and how we can all manage misinformation and combat it in our respective fields. As a reminder, Matt is a formal chemical engineer. He changed fields and is now working as a professional dog trainer and runs Manageable Mutts. His background in engineering gives him a strong scientific base and the training to think in systems and to always keep asking questions. As a dog trainer, he is regularly talking to people about misinformation surrounding the behavioral science around training. He has firsthand experience in communicating directly with people who may have preconceived ideas and working to educate people on the modern scientific approach. And joining us for the first time is my brother, Derek Banat. Derek is a cognitive performance specialist who works with U.S. Air Force pilots and winter sports Olympians, helping them build the mental skills required to perform under extreme pressure. His background is in sport and performance psychology, and his specialties include decision-making, resilience, attention control, and critical thinking in high-stakes environments. Derek studies professionally how the human brain processes information and makes decisions when the stakes are high and the time to think is shorter, which it turns out is exactly the environment misinformation is designed to exploit. Matt and Derek, welcome to The Climate Layer. I'm so happy to have you on.
Happy to be back.
Thanks for having me. What a treat.
So before we get into reactions, I want to lay out exactly what was claimed in this scene and what the actual data shows. I'm doing this up front so that nothing in our conversation today gets mistaken for endorsing or repeating these claims without context. Tommy Norris's central claim is this: over a wind turbine's 20-year lifespan, or 25 years, it will not offset the carbon footprint required to make it. That is the claim that has spread the furthest. Here is what independent research actually shows. Multiple life cycle assessments, including published data from turbine manufacturer Vestas and peer-reviewed studies, find that a typical wind turbine pays back the carbon cost of its manufacturing within roughly 6 to 12 months of operation. Turbines then operate for 20 to 25 years. That means the claim is not just incorrect, it is off by a factor of roughly 20 to 25 times. Norris's character also raises the diesel, concrete, and steel involved in manufacturing and installation, implying this undermines the clean energy claim. Life cycle studies already account for all of that embodied carbon. It is factored into the payback period above. Once paid back, turbines produce electricity with zero ongoing fuel emissions for decades. And he raises the real challenge of transmission infrastructure if the country moved to renewables quickly. That part contains a kernel of truth. Transmission build-out is a genuine and serious challenge, but it is presented as a reason renewables fundamentally do not work, rather than as an infrastructure investment problem that is actively being addressed. There's one more thing worth addressing directly because it runs underneath this entire scene without being stated explicitly. The character is an oil industry fixer. The implication throughout is that petroleum is essential to keeping the lights on. It's not. As a reminder from previous episodes on this podcast, less than 1% of US electricity is generated from oil. And when petroleum is used to generate electricity, it is among the most expensive options available. The American power grid runs primarily on natural gas, coal, nuclear, and a rapidly growing share of renewables. Oil's role in the energy system is almost entirely in transportation, heating, and industrial processes, not electricity generation. This matters because conflating oil with grid power is one of the most persistent and consequential misconceptions in the energy debate. It makes fossil fuel dependency seem more total and more irreplaceable than it actually is. And it is exactly the kind of framing this scene relies on without ever having to say it out loud. That is the data. Now let's talk about why this monologue worked so well on so many people despite being riddled with false and misleading claims. All right, so Derek, I want to start with you since this is your first time on the show. From a cognitive performance and decision-making perspective, what is actually happening in an audience's brain when they watch a scene like that? Why is a confident, simple, emotionally resonant claim so much more persuasive in a moment like that than like a complicated or nuanced, accurate one?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And I think the key that you said right there was they wanted the contrast of the character of Billy Bob Thornton to be the grounding force and the calm perspective. And nothing encapsulates that better than the fact that they really shoehorned in a scene where they had a rattlesnake at the end who scares the poor little lady, and he comes in to save her. And it's so funny that they use a snake because the human brain has evolved over so many generations, not just to observe threats mostly in order to survive and evolve, but specifically the snake. It is so deeply ingrained in us as humans to be super fearful and deeply afraid of snakes because that was the original predator of the human in the grass to be scared of, climbing up on you, and you don't know when it's coming until it gets you. And if you've ever seen those videos of a cat reacting to a cucumber, right? It's kind of the same idea in the human brain where the cat jumps and it thinks the cucumber is a snake. And that just goes to show exactly how deep the fear that they're trying to instill in you is versus the calm, quiet, steady Billy Bob Thornton character. And it's just super important to realize what they're doing here is they're appealing to your amygdala, which is a really ancient structure in your brain. You share it in common with a fruit fly, anything with a vertebrae, and it is made to scan any threat, right? And what do we hate is threats of change, especially to the status quo. And if you can sell or you can permeate that fear on a deep unconscious level, then you can sell whatever you want.
That's powerful.
We use very similar principles in dog training, just pairing associations. And like dogs do that very well. People do it very well. It's like you have a thing, whatever that is, thing A here, and you can make something scary or something happy happen at the same time. You're going to have associated with that thing. So it's like, oh, alternative energies. We're talking about oh, look, a snake. It's scary. Be scared of this too. And because we're thinking about alternative energy and looking at alternative energy, talking about alternative energy, and then suddenly there's a snake causing fear. We can make those associations. It's pretty blatant, but it's like it's not. It's a very common thing done in film and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Derek, so you train pilots to make high stakes decisions under pressure and resist cognitive shortcuts that lead to bad outcomes. Is there a version of the training you do that the general public could use to resist this same kind of persuasive misinformation that comes to people in everyday life?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And I just want to start off by saying it's really not easy by any means, because what happens when we get stressed is our attention goes from broad to incredibly narrow, right? If you are missing your car keys, right, and you're going around looking for it, there might be an obvious place that you put the car keys, but your heightened stress and your need to attach to the outcome of finding the car keys really takes you away from the process of maybe retracing back your steps. So to answer your question, I want to really start in two layers. One is focusing on the process, right? We look at the outcome of, oh, okay, how are we going to get to carbon neutral or renewables that are actually feeding back into the system? When really the question is, where do we even start? Because we can always start and create a process around how to even see what the top of that mountain might look like. And number two, and this is the biggest thing that I work with, and the reason that the US government has created contractors like cognitive performance specialists is because they're really trying to, in the armed forces, make a pivot away from simply doing total mental toughness training to resilience training as well. And resilience is a pretty important word because most people generally don't understand resilience. When I ask most people what is resilience and for them to define resilience, they're really going to say some version of mental toughness. They're going to say, going through a wall, pushing harder, making sure you work longer hours, and just overall grinding yourself down lower and lower on the stone until you're bare. And really, right, the idea of resilience is not to continue pushing, but it is to create space and recover quickly. And when we take a step back and look at recovery as the main objective of resilience, now we understand rest. Now we understand, all right, if we can create space between the problem, first and foremost, now we can check our tool belt, right? What kind of resources do we actually have, right? Like when it comes to climate, if we actually hit the panic button on the oil, we're going to put all the resources into the oil. But if we create that space, now we can invest in other renewable energies and create that space from our need in order to actually get a better picture of what kind of resilience as a society can we do to make those steps forward. And I'll finish with this. There's a very famous story about a sniper at a training school in the desert. One of the most mentally tough snipers in his unit. He has two objectives: get the perp and tag the sniper target. And two is if you get bit by a snake, it's really important to figure out what type of snake it is so that they can get you the proper antivenom. When he ultimately gets bit by a snake, super mentally tough sniper, goes very narrow with his perception. He switches that objective focus to objective number two, and then gets into hand-to-hand combat with the snake. He smashes the snake's head on a rock, but not before being bit 12 more times by the snake. Fast forward, he's in an ambulance, and he's white-knuckling the snake on the way to the hospital, and he refuses to let go of the snake. And as he's holding on to the snake, the only time that he finally lets go is when they say, you've completed the objective. And his training, his mental toughness, he hears, oh, you've completed the objective, and he finally relaxes and lets go of the snake. And this is a really important example of an individual who's very mentally tough, but lacks that resilience training, right? With a little bit more resilience training, this sniper gets bit by the snake, checks his watch, says, I have about 5 minutes, give or take. I'm not an expert in anti-venom. Until the venom hits his bloodstream and it starts to cause problems. So he checks the watch to see how much time he has, and then he looks on his persons to see what tools are available, right? He has on him a knife. He has a secondary weapon, pistol. And he also has a camera that he would use to make sure that he proved that he got the very first objective. And that's the idea of how do we actually start to train resilience and recovery?
That's really powerful. And I think, honestly, from the climate activist or somebody that's focused on combating climate change and working in the industry, in the sector, not saying that we're all snipers, right? I don't want to detract from that. But like that there is in the field, especially these days, this feeling of hopelessness. And it's so frustrating. And the goal is to stop climate change. The goal is to get carbon emissions down to a certain amount. The goal is to get the rate at which the temperature, the global temperature is going up down below 2 degrees Celsius a year. Like there are these goals that we're trying to get to. And every time we don't achieve those goals, we get more frustrated, more less motivated and demoralized. And I think it's a powerful sentiment to just, you've got to focus on your objectives, your mental health, your day-to-day goals, and like look at the little wins, not just the win at the end of the tunnel. So Derek, sorry, I don't know that that's quite exactly the point you're making, but I feel like it's super powerful to make sure you communicate to the folks in the field that are trying to see, like in any field, that are trying to fight what they view as the good fight, if that makes sense.
It sounded kind of, to me, if I can jump in for a second, like
please.
almost like the analogy would be like, you hear this oil fixer guy make all these claims, and build a mental resiliency would be, rather than reacting to that fear right away, would be to take a step back and be like, I'm going to think about this for a second, wonder if those claims are actually true.
Yep.
Rather than let the fear get caught up in the fear, go, oh my God, we don't have these resources. All the things I wanted to do aren't going to work. And just assuming that he's correct and getting caught up in it. But with the right kind of resiliency and the recovery mindset, it's like, okay, maybe tonight I'm going to go think about that for a minute, or I'm going to go research this stuff, or I'm going to ask my friend who's in the field. It's going to ask for more information to verify. That's taking that step to verify and see what tools and information is actually available to us, rather than just assuming that we only have our hands to combat the snake, or we only have oil to fuel our society.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, and I'll jump in too for a second. He also basically assumes that because it would take so long to get to renewables, that we shouldn't try at all. And that is the suffocating feeling of we don't have the time or the resources or the energy, where you don't have to make a 100% investment right away, right? Most changes happen incrementally over time. The argument there that he's trying to put out there is that it's not worth it to try.
Yeah.
And not only is that defeatist, it's spreading hopelessness, like you said.
Yeah.
Whereas it's tough, like Matt was saying, like how do you create the space when it seems like such a final argument from an authority figure? And that's the big question.
Yeah, like one of the important things to keep in mind that, like, Alex, I think you and I talked about this on our last episode a little bit, where from the character's perspective, I don't know what the individual writers or directors were thinking at the time, but purely trying to get inside the head of the character, like he may not even be acting in bad faith. He might actually believe everything that he said. Like he may be misinformed himself on like how long it takes the windmill to really offset its own carbon footprint. Since there are some very like old ideas that do get parroted a lot, and even parroted by people who are in positions of power and influence, like he is now, he may just really think that. So he's not necessarily trying to be disingenuous. So a lot of these people in the oil fields, like they they're just as misinformed as others.
Yeah, and I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole and detract too much, but I do want to touch on like the burden of responsibility, in my opinion, Matt, to where we're talking about like this character, this person in the oil industry, they've been exposed to these the misinformation for so long that they're just spouting what they've been told. Yes. The writers of that scene, and this is where, not to criticize the show or what it's trying to do or its fictional, like whatever it is, like people have the right to create what they want to create, but if the goal is to communicate truth, to bring to bring light to the struggle of the oil man, or like what it's like to really live in this industry, I do think in Hollywood it's tough, right? Like it is important to do your research, and if you're going to make claims, it can infect and do a tremendous amount of damage. Jaws is a great example of this, where there is society fears sharks to a level that is borderline paranoia. Like the amount of shark attacks just does not equate to what Jaws is really like in fear in our societal setup. But then, Matt, on the other end of the spectrum, if we look at any sort of scientific movie, sci-fi movie, you and I have talked about this before, where like, people like to use like the phrase quantum a lot, and it's just like creatively, like, I don't know what this is going to do, so I'm just going to say it's quantum, and it's a complete bastardization of what science really is saying about the thing. But yeah, just to leave it there, that like, sorry, Matt,
essentially my point basically being like there's a lot of like real world people who think that they are saying the correct facts there.
Right.
And that can be hard to reach because they already think they're right. They're not even trying to win a game exactly. They're just misinformed themselves.
Yeah. And I think the reason I went to the writers there is because those people who are already misinformed are the direct audience to a show like this too, as well as a broader audience. But like, the misinformation that people like this have at their fingertips is already just reinforced, and the feeling that this is true is more reinforced there.
I think one of the things that the scene also does a good job of in terms of reaching people is making sure that Billy Bob Thornton is coming from the same ground as everyone else.
Yeah.
Even he's like, look, I don't love oil, but we have to use oil. This is just what we have to until we find a better alternative to oil. This is all we got. And that's what they do a good job of getting in common with everyone, is you have this big oil executive who even that guy is like, hey, my hands are tied.
Yep, a lot of pieces there. And it is a very common argument that comes up all over the place in renewables, in electrification, in any sort of behavioral change that is asked of us as people in various countries, that is needed for us to combat climate change. And I think we've talked about the hopelessness, and we've talked like a key trigger point, Derek, to that hopelessness is like, listen, like, this is the way it's been done, this is the way we're doing it, and there just isn't a better option at this point. And it almost like it's a proactive way of saying like there's no better option, and even for those that are looking, just don't bother trying.
Yeah. But I think even, and we'll probably touch on this later as well, as the main theme of how do we how do we communicate when people are stuck in there, or not stuck per se, but have an idea of what is truth. As kind of Matt was alluding to, in my view, the key is finding that common ground first, and then figuring out, okay, how do we communicate where we can see the same path to that common ground that we both hold.
Yeah.
Because more often than not, I think we are on that common ground with people we even disagree with.
Yeah. And that's something that Matt and I talked about in something that Matt is dealing with, and what Matt has seen as a technique to dealing with misinformation is meeting people where they are, finding that common ground, and sort of trying to build from there rather than from a point of, Matt, how would you say it?
Yeah, it's kind of like looking to find out like the common goal we have in mind, and yeah, like meeting people where they are. Like it's kind of like with dogs. Like maybe I get them to stop using a shock collar on their dog, which isn't aligned with modern behavioral science, but they still use a prong collar, which is also not the best practice method. There's better methodologies out there, but they've made improvements. Uh, as they start to gradually learn more little by little, I'm not expecting an overnight change with the people. Just like when I'm training dogs, I don't expect them to be fixed in a single session. It takes multiple sessions, days, weeks, and in many cases of consistent work. I have to expect the same from the people as we start to educate more.
Yeah. And so, Matt, kind of a follow up, since you deal with people who have absorbed misinformation about animal behavior and have to gently correct them, as you were sort of just saying, without implying, without alienating them. If a client repeated what Tommy Norris's Billy Bob Thornton's his monologue to you, word for word, but in a different field, but it's
Yeah, come
about
on.
dog training instead of wind energy, how would you respond in the moment, in the room, etc.?
In the moment, I wouldn't be looking to like entirely change his mind. Like I'm not like that's not a place for a debate exactly. And you could even argue that the structure of debates can be counterproductive, anyways, in many cases, because it's just two people shouting, "You're wrong," "No, you're wrong," at each other. But it would be more like understanding where he's coming from. Something like that. I'd be like, okay, yeah, we need energy. We do. We can both agree on that. That's a good starting point. But if they're like constantly spewing these myths out there, um, sometimes I'll kind of start to use some like mental jujitsu a little bit. It's not like I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to say like some people have to say like, oh, I have to be the alpha, I have to be in charge. And I might be like, yeah, you know what? Even more than being in charge, maybe just think about being like the leader somewhere that they can look to for comfort and reassurance, which leads into them seeing a bicyclist go by that makes them scared. And instead of bark at them, they look back at their owner and get a treat for reassurance. We're building reassurance. But I can start that big, okay, do you want to look at you for reassurance? Or I might use the term they want to look back at you for leadership. They're looking back at you for those cues rather than looking at the scary trigger and reacting to that and trying to chase a bicyclist or go attack another dog or something. It's just kind of trying to use kind of the language they're already using to frame the principles that I'm trying to bring them. So it's kind of like just trying to explain things in a way that they're going to understand. So I won't explain things the exact same way to every person I'm talking to. I'll kind of alter some word choice here and there, but I'm trying to get to the same principles.
I think question first for Derek, then Matt, for you guys to sort of react to. But like, so Norris frames Billy Bob Thornton's character, because we only saw the scene, so I don't even remember his name without looking at rewatching the scene. But his character frames the lawyer's position as naive idealism and his own position as hard-won practical wisdom. So like the framing of "I've seen the world, you haven't." It's incredibly common in misinformation, and I assume a lot of different fields. So like Derek, kind of first to you, why is that specific frame so effective?
Yeah, I think it's so effective, and I'll actually see if I can blend a little bit of that behavior science that Matt knows so well. If you have what we call the bad dog effect, right? If you see a dog that is barking loudly at something over there, and you might assume it's a bad dog, and it starts to get treated like a bad dog, right? Then that's when you put on the spike collar. That's when you start yelling at it. Then it starts to actually fear the world, right? If you can put it into that bad dog box, it will start acting like a bad dog today. And it's going to reinforce your belief that that's a bad dog, right? And so when we come from a space of you don't know, you haven't seen the world, we're assuming that that's a bad dog and that needs to be trained properly. When in a lot of moments, and Matt's going to be able to speak to this much better than I can, but right, if you start to treat it as a good dog, right, give it autonomy and give it self confidence, right, then you can start bridging the gap. And I'll let Matt take it from there.
Before that, Derek, to frame that in sort of your world that you operate in, like like if this were like not a trainee, but maybe like an Olympian who you're trying to help guide them to a certain perspective or maybe a certain diet or a certain like exercise, and they say like, no, I need to use a CrossFit exercise this way. I'm I'm like 10 years older than you, so I know better, or I've just been around the world more. I've been to Norway because they train this, but like, just for Derek, for that quickly, like, how do you approach that? Like, and again, like back to the original, that's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my, that is a big one to unpack. There are a lot of different ways to attack that question. You see a lot of people who, because they were on an Olympic team or they were, a big time player for this team, they'll say, okay, I can coach this professional team right away. And oftentimes, the owners of those teams will say, oh, this person has a lot of professional playing experience, so they'll be a great coach. And they come in and they don't know how to communicate, first and foremost. But if I'm going to take a step back and say, okay, what can we do now in those situations? I would say, right, the negativity is what spreads the most quickly.
yeah,
It's what permeates, it's what sells, it's what triggers the emotional centers of our brain. So really, I would say the skill is not to go positive, because I think people don't want to hear it. It works about as well as if someone's freaking out, you tell them to calm down. I don't know when that's worked. You're really better off getting to neutral, right? A car has to get to neutral before it goes to forward from reverse. And with that, that's withholding all judgment, first and foremost. So instead of saying, oh, you're a lawyer, you haven't experienced anything, you might say, this is your first time in the desert, right? You don't know what a snake is or looks like or what kind of snake it is, right? The key is to start without judgment and to be able to attack from a neutral standpoint, because that neutrality is the only way, in my opinion, to truly get someone to stop focusing totally on the negative.
yeah, that's good. Love it, Derek. Matt, and then sorry, as Derek was sort of throwing it to you before I cut in.
Oh yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense because like it's kind of like you have the oil people. They want to like in that scene he wants to like yell and berate the clueless woman lawyer who doesn't know what she's talking about out in the desert. And that kind of mirrors. We have this group of people who are very pro fossil fuel and very not even pro fossil fuel, but anti alternative energy. They're anti clean energy, anti environmentalism. Meanwhile, I think you can kind of be both. There's a space to be pro fossil fuel now because we do need to support it with what we have now, but also be pro environmental stuff in the next 10, 20, 30 years and wanted to move towards that. There's room for both as well. We have this kind of exclusivity fallacy thing going on a little bit. But essentially you have this group talking about the oil. They want to berate the environmentalists. The environmentalists want to berate the oil people. And it's kind of like two dogs just barking at each other. Where if one starts barking at one, the other is likely to just start barking back. And no real progress is being made when these two dogs are just barking. They're just setting each other off. Mm-hmm. So, like, very similar to what Derek was talking about, is getting to neutral. Because that's what I try to do. Like, I work a lot with aggression and with reactivity. That's like kind of like my area of specialty here. So I'm trying to get dogs to be able to process another dog barking at them in a neutral way or going by. So it's like, so they're not going to be set off. So I'm addressing their ability to not reach that aggression threshold. And as people, that's kind of like somebody's going to be saying something like Billy Bob Thornton character is to us and just not get riled up by it. Like, okay, I'm accepting that this person basically barking at me, but can just process that as data. Be like, okay, and then work and not get riled up back.
Yeah.
And then that gives me the space to process facts better later and gather more research.
Awesome. Okay, so question for both of you. If you were rewriting this scene to be factually accurate while keeping it just as dramatically compelling without having to get into like the economics or the like cost per kilowatt hour or whatever, like the hard science of renewables, like when you're trying to, if you're looking for like a television show or a creative scene that is in your respective fields, and instead of spreading something from a misinformation angle, like what kind of factual tools do you see as like still dramatically compelling that you would want to see like a character monologue instead of how this one was executed? Let's start with Matt.
So if I were going to rewrite it, trying to keep it on similar thematic elements,
Mm-hmm.
um, it would probably be a shorter speech just because he listed so many things that were not factually accurate. That if he was going to stick to something being factually accurate and like stick to, and I think that's one of the compelling things about it was that the logic was sound, but it was based off of incorrect foundations. So like if you ran with all those foundations, yeah, the logic adds up, but the foundation is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But so I would essentially have him stick with a more sound foundation, saying that some of this environmental stuff, it's still like maybe saying like it's still some years away. This is what's right in front of us now. We need energy now, and we are providing that service. As he could talk about how we have all these ideals about what we need to do for the future, and I would say it's great to throw all that in there to say him have alliance, and that's all well and good. Let's do that, but let's not forget about what we need right now. That's
Mm-hmm.
probably the best area that I would think to take that in. That would
Okay.
be if you're looking to write it from a character's perspective who's a
Right.
little more pro oil.
Yeah.
I would probably write it more that way.
Right. Right. That's fair. And Derek, your thoughts there too?
Yeah, it's a great question because, how would I rewrite the scene? I would think, coming from my experience and my perspective, what I see in a lot of media is kind of that fear mongering
Mm-hmm.
that we mentioned earlier. So probably instead of trying to sell the fear, I would try my best to reframe the idea to some form of optimism, right? First off, the fear sells because it's emotional, right? You have the cognitive dissonance coming from Billy Bob Thornton, right? Where you have two competing values within yourself that creates the emotional response. And when those values get challenged, you get emotional, right? So for him, he holds that deep belief within himself. I don't love oil. But on the other side, he has, I'm an oil man, right? Those two things create that emotional monologue within him that sells well. And, the fact of the matter is, so much of that negativity that permeates our myths in society come from a negative space, right? One of the most popular books that is sold to middle schoolers and high schoolers is Lord of the Flies, which
Mm-hmm.
is a fictional story about a group of kids who get stuck on an island and ultimately end up beating the crap out of each other and eating each other.
Rest in peace, Piggy.
Um, yeah, rest in peace, Piggy. And when you look at history, that's never happened before. The one time a group of young schoolboys did go off in UK and make their own island, they had a very nice time, and they ran away from their boarding school, felt liberated, and they will recognize that as one of the best times of their life. So, how would I rewrite that? I think I would try to, and even further than that, like even Christianity, right? Like they hold the very, and I'm not going to get religious here,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the core values is we're born sinners, right? And that's what we're trying to get out of ourselves is, coming from that place of being sinful, and where I want to come is that place of hope, right?
Mm-hmm.
A look towards the future that can have all of these things be true. I can be anti-oil. I can be an oil guy. But guess what? Me investing in renewable energy is not on either of those levels,
Mm-hmm.
right? All of those things can be true as I reinvest in my future.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably what I would do is I would probably instill hope that guess what? The eons of money that you can make as an oil tycoon can actually help you reinvest for a better future for all of us. And who cares if it's 10 years, 20 years, 120 years? If it takes 200 years and we can thrive as a society at 200 years, absolutely, you make that decision 10 times out of 10.
Cool. Love it, guys. Okay. Final thoughts. single biggest takeaway that each of you want a listener to walk away with after this conversation, whether it's involved in media, whether it's more your specific field, whether it's something that I'm very passionate about, like, like things that you guys like.
Yeah, I got maybe a little something I've been able to see a little bit from my old engineering
Mm-hmm.
stuff, that just gives it like a little bit of insight into some of the oil stuff and like the reasons that they're so like resistant to change so much is a couple things. Like in a previous scene, he had mentioned like the lawyers talking to him about sending how there's its liability from an oil businessman sending workers to an unsafe,
Yeah.
knowingly sending them to an unsafe site where injury can happen. And he says, well, then everyone in the industry is liable. And there's some truth to that because a lot of refineries or work, they don't put the right safety stuff in place because it's cheaper to just pay the fines than it is to install the right safety equipment and take all the right safety practices. So I think there's a similar thing going on with like environmental regulation. It's cheaper to just pay the fines than it is to do the work to make things cleaner in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, you have a bit of like a sunk cost thing happening here a
Mm-hmm.
little bit where they've already sunk so much money into these drilling and mining operations that the money that's already there, it's gone. And in order to make that investment back takes decades. So like stuff that they're doing now, like they need the oil industry and the fossil fuel industry to keep thriving in order to have a profit off of the investment that they made. So it's not just that, oh, we should just switch now, and it's not as simple as what that character was saying that if X, I think he used the term Exxon,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get involved in a specific company. I just
Yeah.
think the
Yeah.
character,
Yeah.
if some oil
Thank you.
company used thought that this was the profitable way to the future, they would do it. And there's a small element, and you could argue there's a small element of truth to that kind of logic, but it overlooks that they've already put their investment elsewhere.
Mm.
And they're trying to focus on making money off of that investment already that was made like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Uh, and then and that's why they're not shifting.
Yeah. The sunk cost fallacy that is breaking the environment's back, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, like in this case, it's like all from a pure business perspective, it's like almost not even a fallacy because that cost is already, well, I
That's
guess it
fair.
is a fallacy because the cost is already gone from a pure business economic standpoint. From a larger benefit of society standpoint, it starts to become a little fallacious. But from a
Mm-hmm.
purely financial CEO viewpoint, the cost is already there.
Yeah.
Is
Okay.
sunk in. And if your concern isn't for the future, your concern is for your next quarter or making that investment back, then
Yeah.
yeah, so that's like
The
one of
hard
the things
truths.
we're combating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Derek, final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I think that's really important. Like, if the whole theme here is, how do we combat misinformation? The key
Mm-hmm.
is to see like where are they coming from, and I really like that, Matt. It's important to understand. They're not looking that far into the future, at least further than their next quarter or which shareholders benefit. They're asking cui bono at the top. Who
Yeah.
benefits at the tippy top, because that's the bottom line for them, and that's why they call it the bottom line, right?
Right. And it comes back to one of the things, I forget which episode you've mentioned, Alex, that it's more a lack of will than a lack of resources or technology
Yeah.
that we're not essentially fully renewable society
Mm-hmm.
as a whole. Like we have the technology, we have the means, we have the capability.
Mm-hmm.
It's that we're competing against things like these costs that are already sunk in large established corporations that are trying to like make a profit off of old investments, and they
Yeah.
need their industry. So it's like we're competing against that, but and like that's really what's happening. But that's why they're motivated to push the myth that the technology isn't there yet, and this
Yeah.
technology doesn't work, and the ineffectiveness of it, which is just not true. But that tends to be where the motivation comes from. It's a money thing from their end, not even a money thing that it's too expensive for our society.
Yeah, and there are direct examples, and without naming companies, there are car companies that have put out campaigns that are anti-EV campaigns, marketing campaigns they've sunk a lot of dollars into because they have invested so much money in hydrogen fuel cell vehicles or their own hybrid technologies, or they're just super far behind and they want to delay. They want to use delay tactics so that they can catch up and then try to keep up with the market.
Yeah, just because they've already invested in a different direction,
Yeah,
and they're
exactly.
starting to kind of realize that maybe that was not the best investment. And rather than
Yeah.
cutting their losses and move forward, they're trying to steer people away from the way they're starting to go anyways.
Yeah, crazy
Yeah,
stuff.
and I'd say here's my closing thought, especially when it comes to like recognizing mistake that maybe you've made with your resources, right? In my industry, in the sport and performance psych industry, we use this technique called the 16-second cure, which was popularized by Roger Federer, and he was notoriously a big head case when he was younger. He made a mistake and he would let it blow up his entire match. So it got popularized through him and the sports psych that he worked with. You basically, with the 16-second cure, can reset and move forward and on in 16 seconds using these 4 aspects. The first is going to be reacting, which is actually have your natural reaction. Don't just bury your natural reaction, because what you resist persists. 2 is relax, right? After you react, it's important that you bring yourself down and center yourself. Whether that's a deep breath or a reminder that you're not actually under threat. 3 would be reset or routine. He gets into his reset routine, but like we mentioned earlier, take a step back, create some space with the relaxation, and then look at your tool belt, right? What do you know? What skills do you have? What do you want to research? And then that's where that next bit comes in, which is refocus, which is find out that next thing you want to focus on and give yourself a cue for where to go in that direction. Whether that might be looking at what you want to look into further for the research, or where your values are and where those values would have you focus into as you react fully and reset from the setback.
Awesome. Okay, well, Matt and Derek, first of all, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a lot of fun unpacking a scene that nearly broke me the first time I saw it. So thanks for coming.
I think that's what it was designed to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, it
Definitely.
worked.
It was more designed to
In a
just
way.
kind of needle the people on the air quote here other side.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think to close things off, it's important to remember that we are not on different sides at the end of the day. In climate, you are on the side of the people being impacted. That reframe changes everything about how you show up in the conversation. The scene from Landman is good television. Billy Bob Thornton is a compelling actor, and the writing is sharp, and almost everything the character says about wind energy is wrong. Both of those things are true at the same time. Learning to hold both at once, appreciate the craft while seeing through the content, is exactly the kind of critical thinking this moment demands. The human brain is not broken when it falls for confident, simple misinformation. It is doing exactly what it evolved to do. The problem is a system that has learned to exploit those tendencies at scale, which means the answer is not outrage, it's patience, empathy, and showing up with the facts again and again for the people who were targeted and never chose to be misled. Thank you again to Matt Brady and Derek Banat for this conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, what a pleasure.
You can find Matt at Manageable Mutts. Links are in the show notes below. And Derek and Matt really hope to have you back on the show to chat again in the future. This was phenomenal.
Oh, gladly.
Please share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss one. And as always, I'm Alex Banat with Matt and Derek, and this is The Climate.